Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really fascinating look at the latest weekly newsletter from the Macro Butler. It's got this provocative title, The Big Beautiful Bullion.
That definitely catches the eye.
It does, right? And our mission, really, for you listening, is to get past just the headlines. We want to dig deep into this specific material, understand why, so many standard investment ideas are being challenged right now.
And crucially, what that actually means for your own financial situation. Because let's face it, what we've often been told is, quote, risk-free. Well, it might just be the riskiest thing out there today.
Exactly. So this deep dive, we hope, is going to be a shortcut for you, a way to grasp these really critical distinctions, get those aha moments without drowning in data.
Cutting through the noise.
So the big question hanging in the air,
Mm.
are U.S. Treasuries really risk-free? Or is this, decades of Wall Street messaging just a huge illusion?
It's a powerful narrative that's been built up.
Definitely. So buckle up. We're aiming for an entertaining, sharp, and hopefully insightful discussion about why this idea of the big, beautiful bullion is suddenly getting so much attention. Let's kick off with the Macro Butler's core idea. Investors basically have two flavors to pick from. Contracts versus properties was the deal there.
Yeah, I thought the newsletter laid this out really well. It's quite fundamental. So on one side, you've got contracts. Think of these as, well, promises, financial promises, basically IOUs.
Okay, like IOUs.
Exactly. So that includes things like cash, which, some people like in recessions, and bonds. Bonds are essentially just polite loans you make, maybe to a government, maybe to a company.
Right.
Now, bonds can do well if interest rates fall, sure, but they're always, always vulnerable, right? Vulnerable to default or just getting eaten away by inflation. They really boil down to someone saying, trust me.
Trust me. Got it.
Right.
So if contracts are these promises, what about the other side, the properties? What's this real stuff the newsletter's talking about?
Right. So properties are the tangible things, stuff you own directly. There's no third-party promise involved. Not really. Gold is the prime example here. Gold just sits there. It doesn't care about the Fed. It doesn't care about elections. The Macro Butler sees it almost like insurance, insurance against global craziness and, frankly, governments messing up their finances.
Okay, so gold's a big one. What else?
Stocks fit here, too. They represent a direct slice of capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Owning a piece of a company. Great for growth, obviously, but they can get hammered when the economy takes a nosedive. These assets, they don't say trust me, they just say own me.
Me versus trust me. That's a really clear distinction. It highlights the dilemma. The newsletter then mentions Harry Brown, an economist who kind of got this common sense idea, right, with his permanent portfolio.
Yeah, Brown's approach was quite elegant, really. He mixed these two types, 25% stocks, 25% bonds, 25% gold, and 25% cash.
A perfect split. What makes that mix so resilient, especially compared to, say, the strategies most people hear about?
Well, exactly. Brown's whole idea was to balance assets that behave totally differently in different conditions. Contracts, like bonds, they can, as he put it, go poof, right?
Ah.
Inflation eats them, or they default.
Poof, gone.
Gone. Whereas properties, like gold, they tend to just stubbornly hold their value, or sometimes even thrive when contracts are struggling. So putting them together creates this kind of all-weather portfolio. It's designed to handle almost anything the economy throws at it.
Balancing risk and resilience.
Right. By diversifying across these completely different asset personalities. And that's a very different philosophy from the old favorite, the one that dominated finance after World War II, the 60-40 portfolio.
Yes, the 60-40.
Yeah.
60% stocks, 40% bonds. For decades, that was like the reliable family car of investing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Safe, steady, predictable.
Totally. The bedrock.
But the newsletter argues that today it just feels, well, stuck in the past. Like trying to drive that old car on a brand new, very bumpy road. With inflation being sticky, rates going up, geopolitics, messy, a lot of investors are asking, is this classic strategy still fit for purpose?
That's the million-dollar question, or maybe the trillion-dollar question now.
Probably.
Yeah.
So what's the core argument against it? And why did it get so dominant in the first place?
Well, it's a great question. The Macro Butler suggests that the huge popularity of the 60-40, especially its heavy reliance on that 40% in bonds, comes down to this deeply ingrained belief in finance, the idea that U.S. Treasuries are basically risk-free.
The ultimate safe asset.
Exactly. And this idea, it's just been hammered home for decades, repeated constantly by financial institutions, by the media. It's treated almost like, a law of physics. It shapes how banks build portfolios, how advisors talk to clients.
everything.
Yeah.
And it just became financial gospel for so many people. Ever since the U.S. dollar was decoupled from gold back in '71, bonds, especially treasuries, they just became the default adult piggy bank. Safe, steady, respectable.
The sensible choice.
And the result, look at the global bond market. It's swollen to something like, what, $300 trillion? It's just staggering.
It really is.
Now compare that to all the gold ever mined in history, valued at maybe $22 trillion. That's tiny in comparison. Barely 7% of the bond market. For something often called a barbarous relic, it seems to be.
Yeah.
Well, holding its ground.
Exactly. And when you connect that to the bigger picture, I mean, anyone watching the business cycle or looking at global trade, geopolitics, you can see massive upward pressure on long-term yields. It's pretty obvious. Inflation is just annoyingly persistent. Fiscal risks are, frankly, exploding.
Yeah.
And you even have major foreign holders of U.S. debt. Think about pension managers in some BRICS nations publicly saying, hey, if U.S. government spending keeps going like this, we might have to cut back on treasuries.
That's a significant signal. And speaking of government spending, the newsletter makes an interesting point about how political figures, maybe ones who were critical of spending before, suddenly change their tune once they get into power.
Oh, absolutely. It points to a specific example, someone who is a vocal critic of past economic policies, then gets a big fiscal management job, and suddenly seems to embrace very similar strategies they used to rail against.
A shift in perspective, perhaps.
Perhaps. The newsletter argues it shows how getting into power can really reshape your approach to the national checkbook. And this leads right into what the Macro Butler calls the Big Beautiful Bill, a recent piece of legislation.
Okay, the Big Beautiful Bill. What's the story here?
Well, on July 1st, just before it was signed, the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, gave this new Senate bill an initially positive score. They estimated it would reduce deficits by about $0.4 trillion.
Sounds good on the surface.
It does, doesn't it? But, and this is the critical part the Macro Butler highlights, that initial score used a very specific baseline. When you look at the full CBO analysis, digging into the details, it quietly revealed the bill is actually projected to increase deficits by $3.4 trillion over the next decade.
Wow. From a reduction to a massive increase. How does that happen?
The mechanism is quite clever, you might say. The bill basically front-loads tax cuts and pushes spending cuts way out to 2028.
Conveniently timed around future elections.
Precisely. It sets up what the newsletter calls a fiscal cliff. It almost guarantees that these supposedly temporary tax cuts will just get extended later, which could push the deficit impact from that $3.4 trillion up to maybe $4.8 trillion.
So these temporary sunset provisions are really just a way to make permanent promises that blow out the deficit long term.
That's the argument, yes. It's a way of masking the true long-term cost. And what's also fascinating is how they plan to finance these growing deficits. The newsletter notes the current Treasury leadership seems, well, reluctant to lock in debt for longer periods.
Why is that?
They seem to be favoring issuing lots of short-term bills instead. The Macro Butler compares it to, like, managing your household budget by constantly putting groceries on a high-interest credit card instead of getting a proper loan. It's a short-term fix.
Kicking the can down the road.
Essentially, yes. Just keep rolling it over. And while the government is doing this juggling act with short-term debt, asking, why lock in high rates now when we can just roll it over forever? Physical gold is just sitting there, quietly benefiting.
How so?
Well, every time the government chooses short-term bills instead of longer-term bonds, it sort of provides another little boost, a tailwind, for gold. And look, cranking up bill issuance isn't technically quantitative easing, right? The Fed's balance sheet doesn't automatically balloon.
Okay.
But it effectively makes government debt feel a lot more like cash sloshing around in the financial system. This increased moneyness, as the newsletter puts it, it encourages investors to go hunting for yield somewhere else, which inadvertently pumps up risk assets. It's like a fiscally driven QE, but without the central bank actually printing.
That's a subtle but powerful effect. So this brings us to a really crucial insight the newsletter emphasizes. While many everyday investors, maybe even wealthy individuals, are still clinging to this idea that U.S. Treasuries are risk-free,
Yeah, the old gospel.
central bankers, particularly it seems in the global south, they recognized a different truth a while ago. They see physical gold, not government IOUs printed whenever needed, as the real anti-fragile asset.
Exactly. And when we say anti-fragile, we mean something that doesn't just survive chaos and volatility, it actually gets stronger from it. Gold fits that bill. It has zero counterparty risk. It's separate from all the political drama, directly anyway.
Zero counterparty risk, that's key. So it probably shouldn't shock anyone then that gold has now apparently overtaken the euro as the second largest reserve asset globally. That's according to the ECB's review of 2024 holdings.
That's a major shift.
Yeah, as the year ended, the breakdown was roughly 46% US dollar, 20% gold, 16% euro, and then the rest is smaller stuff.
And that 20% share for gold, it might even be conservative. Central banks aren't always shouting from the rooftops when they buy gold.
True. They can be quite discreet.
But what we do know is they've been buying over 1,000 tons a year since 2022. That pushes official holdings up to levels we haven't seen since the 1970s, getting close to the all-time peak back in 1965. We're talking about roughly a quarter of all the gold mined globally just of disappearing into central bank vaults.
A quarter of global production. Why such aggressive buying? What's driving it?
Well, the ECB itself points partly to geopolitical events like the major conflict in Europe and the sanctions that followed. The Macro Butler reads this as a very clear message. The moment the U.S. started using the dollar as a geopolitical weapon.
Weaponizing the dollar.
Right. That sent a stark warning to central banks everywhere. Get gold before your reserves get frozen. And get this. In 5 of the 10 biggest annual gold buying sprees since 1999, the buyers were countries either already facing sanctions or seemingly getting ready just in case.
Preparing for the possibility. That really makes you ask, doesn't it? Who's actually being prudent here? You've got financial institutions in the West often pushing digital dollars, okay, with more deficit spending.
Business as usual.
While central banks, mostly in the global souths, are just quietly stacking physical gold bars. The dollar share of global reserves, meanwhile, keeps slowly shrinking. It's down to about 43% now. Still dominant, obviously, but showing some cracks.
Yeah, emerging market central banks, especially in Asia, are really leading this charge. It's a significant, if gradual, shift.
And meanwhile, retail investors, particularly here in Western economies, seem to have been pretty late to this whole gold rally, which really took off back in 2022.
Very late. Only recently have we seen real inflows into U.S.-based gold ETFs.
But in Asia, places like China and India, retail buyers were way ahead of the curve. Their confidence in cash and bonds seems to be visibly dropping off.
You can see it in the flows.
The new Safe Haven starter pack for them. It seems to be bullion, and maybe some more bullion. Because when things get uncertain, tangible, shiny stuff starts to look a lot more appealing than government promises.
And think about the broader implications. Russia getting its reserves frozen was a huge wake-up call. A brutal reminder that the dollar, for some countries, isn't just money. It can be turned into a weapon.
Right. Control can be exerted.
Exactly. Gold, though. If you store it in your own country, it's pretty much immune to that kind of external control. And with growing worries about central bank independence or maybe governments deliberately weakening their own currencies, well, reserve managers are getting nervous.
Understandably so.
JP Morgan even put out an estimate suggesting that if just, get this, 0.5% of foreign-held U.S. assets were to shift into gold, that alone could push the price to $6,000 an ounce by 2029.
Wow, just 0.5% shift has that kind of impact.
Well, the gold market is big, but the dollar-denominated asset market is absolutely enormous. So even a tiny trickle out of one can cause a massive flood in the other. It's about relative scale.
A flood. Speaking of which, the year 2025, which the newsletter calls the Jubilee year, it's already been a blockbuster for gold, hasn't it? Trade tensions, ongoing wars, whispers of new currency deals.
Yeah, gold seems to be just shrugging off the day-to-day noise and marching higher.
Long-term investors, the newsletter argues, they're not really bothered by the daily price wiggles. They see this striking similarity to the 1970s. Inflation, geopolitical mess, central banks kind of losing control.
The parallels are there.
Back then, gold went ballistic. This time, the newsletter suggests the 70s might end up looking like just a practice run.
It's a provocative thought, and the newsletter gets even more provocative, pointing out the cold, hard truth. When you adjust for what it calls the CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, the official inflation number, which many argue understates reality.
The CPI.
The U.S. government has, in real terms, already defaulted. Not with a big dramatic announcement, but through this quiet, relentless inflation that just steals purchasing power from everyone every single day.
A silent default.
Exactly. And the bond market is where you really see this battle play out. Bonds, the newsletter argues, they tell the brutal truth. And anyone watching has seen yields climbing, even while some people are still expecting easier money from the Fed.
Yeah, that's been puzzling for some.
And when you see both stocks and bonds selling off at the same time, that's a pattern you usually see in emerging markets, not typically how the world's main reserve currency behaves.
It signals something is fundamentally shifting. This all leads us to what the Macro Butler calls the chaos cycle. You've got government overspending, monetary games, systemic fragility just getting worse year after year.
It feels like the same cycle, repeating but intensifying.
And there's this dangerous idea the newsletter suggests, this fantasy that America and other Western countries can just magically grow their way out of all this debt.
Yeah, the grow our way out narrative seems less and less plausible.
But maybe amidst all this chaos, there's a silver lining, or perhaps a golden one. People are finally feeling the sting of inflation directly. It hits you right in the wallet at the grocery store.
The gut punch.
That's it. Shoppers are literally asking, hang on, why am I paying double for half the amount of cereal? That real tangible pain is maybe waking people up, creating this hunger for financial truth.
Absolutely. The Goldilocks era, not too hot, not too cold, that's dead and buried. The age of gold in lots, as the Macro Butler puts it, that's the new survival guide.
Hold in lots.
Yeah. As investors think about moving away from reliance on the big, beautiful bill, meaning government promises, government debt, and towards the big, beautiful bullion, well, the core argument is pretty clear.
It's a shift from promises to tangible value.
It's a fundamental shift away from fragile promises like those government contracts, like fiat currencies, toward the lasting value of real assets, like physical gold. The newsletter's message is stark. Bonds are dying, fiat is melting, and that's driving a potentially massive wealth transfer.
So bringing it back to you, the listener, what does all this actually mean for your financial freedom, your prosperity? We're in a global system that feels increasingly volatile, full of geopolitical tension, declining trust. This shift could genuinely trigger one of the biggest wealth transfers we've ever seen.
It really forces everyone, investors, nations, institutions, to rethink their reliance on those traditional debt instruments and start looking for, well, real value again. Hello, gold.
Hello, gold indeed.
And as the world sort of rediscovers the true value of gold and potentially ditches these so-called safe assets that turned out to be maybe not so safe after all, the big, beautiful bullion just quietly rises. It becomes the anchor, the only real store of value for investors who want to protect their financial freedom, their prosperity.
It really makes you pause and think, doesn't it? Are your current investment strategies really set up for preserving the return of your capital? Or just chasing the return on your capital? Big difference.
A crucial distinction in times like these.
Because in this kind of fractured world, the newsletter strongly implies it won't be digital fantasies or government promises that ultimately safeguard wealth. It'll be the big, beautiful bullion. Timeless. Unyielding.
Physical gold and silver. Free from counterparty risk. Free from surveillance, essentially. They stand out as the ultimate anti-fragile shields against what the Macro Butler calls collective financial stupidity and government overreach.
Allowing you to actually hold real autonomy, real control in these uncertain times. Gold, it seems, really does matter. Yesterday, today, and most likely tomorrow, too.